Grow, Sell, and Retire is the podcast for the lazy overachiever. B.D. Dalton, author of True Gravity and Grow, Sell, and Retire, is here to give you his 25 years of secrets, tips, and systems to take your business to the next level. This is your chance to find out what is working in sales, marketing, and running your business. If you stop learning, you stop earning. Now, here's your host, BD, with today's GSR podcast.
Hey everybody, BD Dalton here, Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast. This is my interview with Dhruva Rajendra, the founder of FastRope and also the writer of RIOT, which is random ideas that are out there. Grab a pen, sit back, and get ready to be amazed about taking products from idea to business. Dhruva, tell us about FastRope and what you guys do for people to take their ideas and turn them into reality.
Yeah, so first off, happy to be here and excited to talk. So FastRope is a product design and development studio. We're based mostly in Washington, D.C., although our team is about 50% remote across the world. So what we do is we partner with big brands, venture-backed startups, and sometimes the occasional entrepreneur who is trying to take their idea from just an idea into something that can actually be built. So we help them design it, we help them build it, and then we kind of help them once the product or app is in market to kind of make sure that they get traction and that the investment they put in the front end to work with us actually is worth it. And we also do some stuff where we'll spin off products and occasionally we'll invest in things that we think are interesting.
So really, when people talk about being entrepreneurs, and a lot of the time they might just be entrepreneurs and breaking away from their financial advice company and just be going out and setting up on their own. But when we start talking about what you guys are talking about, it's more artists, inventors, and creators. And so how do they go from just having an idea to creating a solution? And we'll take it in steps, but going from idea to an actual solution that you guys have helped them design, to turning it into a monetization or into actual proper money. So starting from the idea, how do you guys pull that out of their head and turn it into something?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times what we find is that people have, and again, it could be an entrepreneur, it could be someone working at a bigger company. They have some core insight that, is not something that we sitting at our desks, we being FastRope, would necessarily have. And it's usually because they are working in a specific field, they're really close to a problem, and they see how things they see that there are opportunities to basically make things better. And so what we do when we come in is we kind of try to unpack and understand and just become as empathetic as we can in the shortest amount of time with the problem that they've identified, and then start to help them understand the process and start to pattern match a little bit. So we spend, usually it can be a few weeks, it can often be months, or sometimes we've even had a case where we lived over a year with someone to kind of really understand and get deep into the problem. And then we wade into making it more real. And typically that means designs. So we often are designing web or mobile products. And so what we'll do is start to bring to life some of those insights, ideas, etc., and start to converge them into a few different directions for the product to take. In parallel, we'll be also kind of trying to figure out the go-to-market and overall product strategy. So I think one thing that a lot of people screw up is they just try to get something out the door as quickly as possible, which is something you should absolutely bias towards, but they don't take the time to kind of think a little bit about where this is going to land them. And so what I mean by that is, are you going to be in a market that is growing and expanding? Are you leveraging some sort of new consumer behavior that, again, you can kind of ride on the backs of? So we help them think about their idea in the context of what the overall market is doing. And then we start to converge on building kind of a singular web app or mobile app or whatever. And that, again, that people ask me, how long will that take? Well, that can take anywhere from 8 weeks to a year. It really just depends on what you're building. But then after we launch, that's kind of, that process is a multi-year thing, right? You're always improving the product. It's very rare. I don't think it's ever really happened, honestly, where someone's just built one version of the product and it just stays put. And so what we really push people to think about is, 80 to 90% of the hard development, design work, etc., is actually going to come after you launch the product, so that you can pull that idea, vision, and our best guess on the best design from the product closer to what customers are actually going to use on a daily basis.
So if we rewind a little bit, what's a product, since some of this stuff's already in public domain, what's one product that you had to start off in that process over that 1 year period?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've done it a few times. There's one that we worked on. Actually, it was kind of not really our original client technically, but they were the first kind of big one we worked with. We partnered with my former boss, actually, who had started Priceline.com, the travel site.
Yes.
And that same team that he had worked on with Priceline, they were looking to start a business to disrupt business travel. And kind of what we did was we came in and helped them, take that big vision of business travel needs to be disrupted. Spent a year working with their team, building something that we thought could be kind of a good first candidate that intersected their vision and what the market wanted, and got that out the door. And, to kind of give you a sense, once we launched, that site had dozens of versions of this. Like basically what we did was, we knew that we didn't know a lot. We knew that was going to be a market where we could learn really quickly and iterate. So what we did was we set up the core product in a way that it could be iterated really, really, really quickly. Yes. And harvested learnings and turn them into new product features.
So if I was going from a layman's terms, you had 4 competitors' websites, but you guys were the competitors? Or that layer to be able to A/B test, or to be able to...
exactly. Well, yeah, we ran out of letters of the alphabet. I mean, we had at one point, I'll just broadly say over 50 different live experiments of the site at the same time, simultaneously. So depending on what experiment someone was running, you could hit the site from a completely different experience versus another user. So yeah, we set it up so that we could maximize learning as quickly as possible and kind of get the traction that they were kind of looking for.
Wow, that's amazing. So you had 50 different recipes of Coca-Cola, and you rolled them all out, and tested to see whether the sweeter one over here won, or the more bitter one over here won, all at the same time. But
exactly,
much easier to do in web space than product space, I guess. But
yeah, exactly. And I think the thing that's unique, and I don't want people to run out there and do 50, 60, 70, 80 tests at the same time. Travel's a unique beast. There are in the US anyways, there's over 1 million people booking a business trip every single day. So you basically have, we used to say it every day, you have 1 million at bats basically a day.
Yep.
So per day, versus something that's a little bit more slower, like B2B healthcare sales or something like that, which I have experienced painfully in my life. So, those sales cycles are 18 to 24 months. 80 A/B tests isn't as good as just going really deep on 1 or 2 directions in that context.
Okay, so now you've come up with the business travel site, and then so now you've gone out and tested it. Now, how do you obviously you got to get some noise out there to get people to visit the site to make sure that they're then having their customer experience. Then when do you bring it back down how do you bring it back down into a package that you believe out of those 50 iterations or 10 iterations makes sense for the end user and for you guys to manage, or the company to manage?
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple pieces to this. So I think one is we had a short leash with a lot of these. So If there was an experiment that was not working, again, because we had so many at-bats per day, we could spin something up literally in Monday, Tuesday morning. And by Tuesday at 3:00, we could decide that was just not working for us because it wasn't moving as quickly as others. Now, again, very extreme scenario here, but when you have that many at-bats, you can kind of afford to do that. So we had parameters that we would set in terms of what success looked like, and every experiment had to be basically getting better than a previous experiment. So that was kind of a bit like, and if something was just truly underperforming, we would kill it kind of quickly. If we started to see a cluster of interesting things happening at the same time, we would start to attack those. So in other words, if we noticed that a certain region was starting to create a better booking rate than another region, we might start to develop landing pages, experiences. We might start to move basically deeper into the product to update more features to make it feel more familiar to those users, or something that we think that will increase the conversion rate. So once we start to see data, we start to synthesize that into a few key nuggets, and then we work from the top of the funnel down. So it's really easy to change a landing page. It's really hard to change, not necessarily true, but like a payment, something that's like core on the payment page, right? And so if you're doing experiments at that velocity, or really it doesn't necessarily need to be at that velocity. I think try to make the minimum changes required to kind of further that experiment. And as patterns start to become more clear, work further down the kind of product funnel, if you will.
So if somebody has a medium-sized business and they don't have the budget of Priceline.com or things like that, so if you're working on a normal business, but you're trying out a different user experience, you're in a services business, accountancy practice, or something like that. If you were to boil it back down to product development or service development, what are the three things that you would look at if somebody was measuring something, if they didn't have huge amounts of money and $1 million at bats a day to bring to the table? If you were to break it down and you were telling your brother or sister, here's what you should do in your business, what would that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, and we're not a venture-backed company at FastRope. We primarily make our money off of services, and we've never taken outside money. So we employ our more, call it like frugal, effective, pragmatic tactics ourselves. I mean, I think the broad thing I would say is starting to develop consistency and rhythm. We've noticed that a lot of times with the smaller, mid-sized companies, sometimes they'll do something like start a blog or, do more work on LinkedIn, and we'll start to see some results. And look, I've actually had a victim of this. Either you get busy with the clients that you somehow you won over with these new blog posts, or you lose resources on something else. So I think that it's really hard, but I think sticking to some sort of consistent outbound, some sort of marketing strategy that you feel is appropriate for you, I think is really important. I also think that if you're a medium-sized company, everyone could do more content. I mean, and that sounds like kind of a bold thing, but there are always new platforms that are kind of there's always new platforms that you can employ to kind of get your message out. And the big platforms themselves, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., are always trying new things within their systems, which aren't always explicit new features. Sometimes they're algorithms, sometimes they're other things. So as long as you're kind of meaningfully contributing to those platforms, you'll start to see results. But it is a long game, which would be my last point, which would be you gotta stick with it for a longer time frame, and eventually it will kind of pay off. I mean, for us, we didn't do any marketing for ourselves for the first 2-3 years because all of our business was word of mouth and business development, traditional sales type thing.
Yes.
Actually, this is a funny story. So about a year and a half ago, how old's my kid? Yeah, a year and a half ago, I was entering into the paternity leave phase of my life. And I was like, well, if I'm not going to write content now, I'm never going to do it. So I just started writing a simple email newsletter where I came up with a new product idea every week or two. It's called RIOT. You should subscribe. I first just said, let me do this, every couple of weeks and see what happens. And I've been like, okay, consistent. I would give myself maybe like a B or a B plus in terms of consistency. Certainly more recently, I've been more consistent with it. But what's interesting is, I started with a few hundred people. Now I'm in the thousands in terms of subscribers. I have a rhythm for how I acquire subscribers. So it's kind of compounding value. And when I look at the business from where it was a year and a half ago to now, like a quarter, there's some, maybe more honestly, there you could attribute some of the new clients that we've gotten are a result of that, of me doing the content. And it's also useful on my previous strategy, which was, just doing business development and pounding the payment a little bit. when I have an article that's relevant to a conversation, I can just send it to folks so they can understand a little bit more about, our company's point of view on certain technologies or consumer trends. It has become kind of a fun exercise now that I've gotten into it and dialed into it.
And you went by it really fast, but RIOT, what does it stand for?
Yes. RIOT stands for Random Ideas Out There. One of our team members came up with it and it has stuck. So yes, RIOT is a newsletter where every about 2 weeks I'll send out a new product idea or like kind of an op-ed on what I think a big tech company should do.
What's the craziest thing that you put into RIOT?
Well, I'll tell you the most recent one, which has gotten a lot of buzz, mostly positive with the occasional like, hey, F off. So I don't know if you've been following the sort of drama surrounding WeWork's now not successful IPO, but
we don't work.
We don't work is probably more accurate. So I'd been following it, for months like everyone else, I think. And I was like, well, let me write something about this. And so I wrote a post about my point of view that WeWork, it's unclear whether they have a path back to the light, if you will. But I was like, look, they probably are in a mode now where they're going to have to slow growth in terms of locations because, they're not going to get those financed by the big bank of SoftBank anymore. So they're going to have to look for margin expansion opportunities. Well, if you skim through their S1, they mention community like 130 times. It's in the article.
Yes.
But it was like something they kept coming back to, but it doesn't show up in the numbers, right? Like they're growing their losses with locations, right? So community is like that notion that it actually creates economic value for them is total fiction.
Yes.
And so what I said was, why don't you acquire a business that's actually figured this out? And so I suggested a company called TopTal, which is basically a site that vets freelancers and then matches them with client projects.
Yes.
And my original insight was, we use WeWork. Actually, I think the product is pretty strong. And I see in that feed all the time, there are requests for freelancers, requests for designers, developers, whatever. And so, a very abridged version of the post was WeWork or potentially, given their financial situation, maybe TopTal should acquire WeWork or merge or whatever the verb is there. And actually bring there's rumors that TopTal is doing like $200 million in revenue and is profitable. So, that'd be a hell of a head start if they actually wanted to make that a real, contributor to the bottom line. And from what I can tell, it's very, if TopTal grows like a tech company, like a tech marketplace, yeah, I mean, that would be an interesting move for WeWork. And I admit it's potentially too little too late, but that's kind of a flavor of what's in those posts, coupled with a lot of sarcasm and snarkiness from yours truly.
That's cool. No, that everybody gets into their authors that they follow. They enjoy it.
Exactly.
And so when you looked at that, so you've now got, so RIOT, let's talk about that. So we've got, you're acquiring customers, even though customers are not, you're not actually looking for customers specifically saying, if you subscribe to RIOT, I am going to send you emails from FastRope, blah, blah, blah. So now we've designed something, we've created a solution, and now we've got a business that we're running. And so we talk about blogs and LinkedIn and things like that. Where else do they find customers? How do they find a market to find a customer?
Well, I'll tell you ones I'm intrigued at and ones I'm starting to, advise our clients that we look in together on. So, one is Quora. I mean, a lot of people are on Quora now, but it's just like Google, right? People go there looking for answers, but it's much more curated. So I'm intrigued by Quora. And then the next one's potentially a little bit more risky, but Reddit would be another place. I mean, you go into Reddit and in different markets, there is some pretty rich content. For a little while, some of my previous companies have been in real estate, tech, and I was looking at, for instance, there's a humongous community around construction. You can learn like everything you want to learn about a lot of different industries like construction on Reddit. And I wonder, if I were, for instance, selling construction software, I might become just a super active Reddit contributor in those communities, because I suspect that people would start to know you, and you could develop a following, which then you could translate, into business that way. Where else have I been looking at? I mean, YouTube, I think is still a place where people can, create a following, create buzz, if you will. And honestly, I mean, I mentioned it for myself. I think email, we all talk about how we want to receive less email, but that's kind of the point, in my opinion. So the people who subscribe to my email list, I take it seriously because it's, a very personal one-to-one relationship you kind of develop with these people. In other words, if people are basically saying, like, generally, I don't want more email in my life, however, I'm subscribing to you, that kind of says something that they're really interested, and it's free, right? I guess I paid for a MailChimp subscription, but it's a relatively low cost for a highly engaged customer if they're willing to put up with that little red dot on their mail inbox on their phone that says you have 4 more unreads or whatever, right? So I think email is one that I would, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, that could be, I would say do more of. Those are the platforms that I would, if I was more, for resource-constrained companies, I would start to explore.
And I think you kind of you alluded to it without even really meaning to, or maybe you did, but it's also you were talking specificity. Picking 2 or 3 target markets, like you said, for construction, purchasing, or if you were doing this, or if you were doing medical, or this. People try to be. A lot of people try to go where all the money is versus the specific money that they want and the clients that they're looking for. So that focus really can save you a lot of time and headache, but then putting the money into it and the time, because those are the 2 things that came back into it: specificity and also making sure that your content.
I'll add one more. So, and on that last point, actually, that's where I would add one more piece, which is like, don't fake it. In other words, if you don't post, I don't post anything to Facebook. I'm barely in there, right? So I don't post to Facebook, right? Much to the chagrin of my marketing minion, right? Like, it's just not a place where I feel like it's just not me, if you will. Versus writing these long form emails, that feels more personally more, and I guess I turn them into posts, right? Like that, say 500 wordish range. I enjoy composing those posts and pulling them together. On LinkedIn, what I do right now is I'll find interesting videos and photos and infographics and stuff like that. I post them to LinkedIn almost like I'm posting to Instagram or something. It's like I've kind of adapted each of these to make them a little bit more fun. And I don't try to force something. Like if I'm never on Facebook, to go back to that one, which seems like more and more people are not spaghetti tap on Facebook, but I just don't, for me personally, I might at some point, try to invest more time there, but I try to go really deep on the platforms that I'm already spending time on, I guess.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, because you start to spread it, and then it doesn't make sense to the same audience, and people hang out in different places for different things. So
it also makes me feel less guilty when I'm poking around LinkedIn and I'm like, wait, I'm working. I swear I'm working right now. I'm not stalking some of my ex-classmates or whatever. Yeah.
So here's another one. So we've talked about ideas, solutions to businesses, and obviously you're the founder of a company. When do you jump? When do you feel that you're now okay? I'm leaving this and going to actually work for myself, because this idea or this thing that I've had is now turned into something that can do X. When would you suggest people think about making that jump?
Yeah. Well, I'll go back in time with myself. So I actually started in kind of management consulting around healthcare type work. And I spent a few years there, long enough to realize that I was going to be either a really great employee, or a really bad one, which basically means like I did good work, but man, was I a pain in the ass. And when I made that kind of leap, and I'm going to, when I made my leap into my own thing, I didn't have, wife, kids, or anything like that. But what I did do was I kind of had mental proof points that I would want to see. So, some customer interest, some metric around revenue, and then some frankly, like funding traction. Because at the time I was starting a venture-backed business, I wanted to see, how far I could get. So when I'm advising folks, and this happens a lot, we'll advise somebody who is starting to flirt with leaving. I'm like, look at those things, and it should become obvious over time that the leap is worth taking based on those buckets. So I think you can roughly adapt those to everyone, but just going backwards on that, funding traction is really only applicable if you think you're going to start a venture-backed business. So if you applied to Y Combinator or Techstars and you got in, it might be time for you to, leave your job. Why? Because you'll probably raise more money to make it so that you can actually pay yourself a salary and not just, eat ramen and live in your parents' basement. Funding and product traction, I mean, those can be related, but I basically see how far people can get before the working at night kind of thing breaks, and or they're making more money at night than they are during their day job, right? Which starts to become like, well, maybe you should actually leave what you're doing. So yeah, that's usually the broad advice I give folks. And again, it's sort of what I found anyways, is that between those three-ish categories, I can start to figure out, if they have a mortgage to pay and a bunch of other stuff, like I can kind of adapt that framework to them.
That's cool. Okay, now here's some fun questions.
Awesome.
What type of tech is making your life more fun, easier, or more enjoyable?
Interesting question. I'll tell you what I'm having a lot of fun experimenting on right now. I've had a fascination going back for about a year and a half or two with augmented reality. I think the technology is still a little early, but there are these little weird things that AR is making a little bit easier. So I'll use the measuring tool. I mean, we moved into a house a couple of years ago, and every now and then we'll look at moving stuff around the house or try to measure a wall for a new picture frame or something like that. And augmented reality, there's a measure app that Apple has now, makes it surprisingly easy to kind of do that. And it also makes it easy to communicate. And I think this is where AR is going to go. So, let's say my wife is out, and this actually happened about a month ago. She was out and she saw something that she thought about, maybe we could hang this on the wall kind of thing.
Yep.
So, but she had no idea how wide the space was above our fireplace, and I wasn't really sure where the tape measure is, and I also wanted an excuse to test out this AR app. So I measured the wall in AR, and it had the measurement. I sent a picture message basically of it to her, and she got what we wanted, or she got the information she needed to kind of like understand how the physical object she was kind of shopping would actually roughly show up in our room and look like. So that's something I've been, every time I see an AR app, I've more or less downloaded it and tried to see, what it can do and where the limitations are. And, each model. So there's another piece of AR that I don't think is talked about as much, which is computer vision. So computer vision basically lets these smartphones in our pocket understand the context of the room around them. As that technology has been getting better, the AR experiences will also, I think, get better, because it won't be, the basically the software won't be guessing where different items are and stuff like that. So I don't want to get too far deep into that, but essentially I think AR is going to become a new way for us to communicate information in the visual world that we see around us. And I think if you're skeptical on this point, what I would ask people is to look at how often they're sending, picture messages from one person to another saying like, hey, like this is what this room looks like, or, this is what this car looks like. And they mark it up. I mean, look, like the iMessage feature in Apple, like it now has pretty robust markup tools. That's for a reason, right? It's because we're communicating information in this way that's much simpler than a text message of, hey, like this car is 15 by 20 meters or whatever it is, right? So I think I'm very curious about AR and specifically how it can be applied to how we communicate visually with one another.
Cool. How about what are you reading for business or for fun?
Yeah, so I try to keep pretty active on reading, and this month I've been going really deep into. I don't know if you're familiar. Have you ever heard of John Boyd by any chance?
No.
This guy is totally fascinating. So John Boyd was a fighter pilot in Korea. He came back and he had three massive contributions to the world around us. First, he developed, actually, I think it was four actually, but he was kind of like this self-taught physicist, engineer, everything, right? So he basically wrote what's the equivalent of the Art of War for fighter pilots in the right out of Korea, which is still used to this day. He then decided that it didn't go far enough. So he actually went back to school, went to Georgia Tech, got an engineering degree, and developed a thing called EM theory, which basically turns into math all of the insights he had in his first pass. But EM theory is now how we evaluate fighter planes, and he can literally predict to this day again which fighter planes are going to be effective against others in combat. And you can actually, and then what he did was expanded that further to really to address all sorts of war tactics and business tactics. Today, there's a thing called the OODA loop that he developed based on all this stuff. So anyways, he had like 4 or 5 insights. So I started with his biography earlier this month. He has a series of acolytes. I'm making my way through one that was more business focused right now. And I'm hoping that if I finish that up this week, I'll get to reading one of his favorite translations of Art of War next week. So I'm going very deep on the John Boyd world. And the reason I did that was I heard someone talking about this biography, and he was kind of using it to interpret, all the business that he sees. And he was like, when you think about it, business is a lot like when you're flying a jet plane in dogfighting, basically. And what he meant by that was, if you've ever seen like a fighter pilot movie or whatever, you see that they're always moving their heads around to kind of see where the enemy is, even though it's like right in front of them. Well, it's for 2 reasons. One, warfare is 3-dimensional, but what they're trying to do is observe where this other person is, and using that relative position to where their enemy is, they, make quick moves and counter moves, right? And so when you kind of parlay that into business, you can kind of, if your job is to basically understand, when information is coming into you, whether it's KPIs for your business, if you can understand your moves and counter moves better, and like how that drives the equations that kind of underscore your business, that can start to translate into becoming a better leader and manager of a company. So I've been going very deep on this world, and it's been really, really interesting.
Very cool. Okay, and then now, if somebody's where do we find you on the web?
Yeah, I post a lot on LinkedIn. My Twitter handle is at DKRAJENDRA. I'm moderately active there, I would say.
Okay.
And then my newsletter you can find at RIOT, RIOT.FastRope.in, and FastRope is FASTROPE.
Very cool. Okay, and then on our way out here, the last couple of seconds, if somebody was just tuning in to the last minute of this, what is your golden nugget, your tip to business owners, inventors, anybody else that you wanted to that takes them back to the beginning, they rewind and listen to the whole thing? Your top tip, Dhruva.
Ooh, top tip. That's a tough one. I think we didn't really mention this going through it, but I think one of the things I try to emphasize, both for, people I'm advising and clients we have, is, stick to the process. You're going to be wrong probably more often than you're going to be right. But if you're just disciplined and consistent about, attacking the next kind of hurdle in front of you, eventually that it'll compound and you will have something that you will be proud that you built.
That's really cool.
How'd I do? That was good?
That was really good. No, really good. So thank you very much, Dhruva, for coming on the Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast. And we'll definitely send people over to get on and riot with you.
Awesome. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks for joining us on Grow, Sell, and Retire. For more information, tools, or to book one of our team members to work with your team, business, or to speak at your event or conference, visit bartdaltonconsulting.com or email contact@bartdaltonconsulting.com. Buy the book True Gravity on Amazon. If you want to work for the rest of your life, that is your business. If you don't, that is ours.